once upon a time, there lived a fool. Oh, he was big, and he was strong, and he was a good-hearted lad, but somehow his intellectual development had been arrested at a rather early age. Now, whenever this poor, hapless fool went into the town, all of the townspeople would laugh at him and mock him and make sport of him just because he was so very foolish. And during the course of one of these visits into the town, one of the local barroom philosophers told the fool that what he really needed in life was a good pot full of brains. Well, now some others had gathered about, hoping for some merry entertainment, and they all agreed with the man. They said, yes, indeed, the fool was in need of a pottle of brains. And one of them told the fool that he should go to the wise woman who lived up on top of the high rocky hill and tell her that he was in need of a pottle of brains. And the rest all agreed. They said, yes, indeed. She dealt in spells and magic and potions and things, and she could give him anything he wanted. And so the fool went home to tell his mother what the townspeople had told him, and to ask his mother if he could go to the wise woman's house to buy a pottle of brains. And the fool's somewhat foolish mother said to her son, that thou should, my lad, for thou hast sore need of one. For if I were to die, who'd look after a poor fool such as thou? Thou art no more fit to look after thine own self than an unborn baby. And I'm 53 years old, I can't live forever. But mind thy manners, my lad, and speak her pretty, for those wise folks is nobody to talk impolite to. And so the fool walked up the hill to the wise woman's house, and when he arrived there, he knocked on the door, and when no one answered, he waited for quite some time, and then he knocked on the door again, and when still no one answered, he waited for a while longer, and then finally he opened up the door just a crack, and he peeked in, and there he saw the wise woman sitting by the fire, stirring a big pot. And so the fool stepped in through the door, and he said, good evening, missus. The wise woman looked up from her pot. She looked up at the fool. She sized up the situation, and she said, good evening, fool. And she went back to stirring her pot, and the fool stepped in a little further. He took off his hat, he twisted it in his hands, he looked back out the door behind him, and he said, it's a fine night. Fine, said the wise woman, and she went on stirring her pot, and the fool scratched his head, twisted his hat in his hands, looked back out the door again, and he said, it'll maybe rain, but nappin' it won't. Nappin', said the wise woman, and she went on stirring her pot, and the fool scratched his head, twisted his hat in his hands, shifted from one foot to another. He looked back out the door again, and he said, well, I can't think of nothing else about the weather, but the crops is getting on fine. And our cow is getting fat. And I hope that's enough polite talking. Do you have any brains for to sell? Well, now that depends, said the wise woman. If thou wants king's brains, or jouster's brains, or schoolmaster's brains, well, I haven't got any. I've got no use for defective gray matter. Oh, no, I just want some ordinary brains. Something clean and common-like, same as everybody else around here has. Well, I might be able to manage that if thou wouldst be willing to help thine own self. Oh, I'll do anything you say. Well, then let me see, said the wise woman, and she stirred her pot around. She looked down into the bottom of the pot, then she looked back up at the fool, and she said, bring me the heart of the thing that thou likest best of all, and then I'll tell thee where to find thy Pottle O Brains. But, how can I do that? That's not for me to say, my lad. Find out for thine own self if thou doesn't want to be a fool all thy days. But thou have to answer me a riddle, so's I can see that thou's brought me the right thing. Now I've something else to tend to, so be off along thy way. And the old woman picked up her pot, she carried it into the back room, and the fool walked back down the hill to tell his mother what had happened. And after the fool had told his mother everything that the wise woman had said, he went on to say, and, I reckon I'll have to kill our pig, 'cause I like bacon better than everything. Well, then do it, my lad, said his mother. For sure 'twill be a strange and wondrous thing for thee if thou canst buy thyself a Pottle O Brains and learn to look after thine own self. And so the fool went out into his backyard, and he killed his pig. And he cut out its heart, and he wrapped it up in brown paper, and early the next morning he carried it back up the hill to the wise woman's house. And when he arrived there, he knocked on the door, he let himself in, and he said, good morning, missus. I reckon I brought you the right thing this time. Here's the heart of the thing I like best of all. I'll just put it here on the table. Can I have my Pottle O Brains now? Well, the wise woman looked doubtfully at the package on the table. She walked over to the fireplace. She sat down. She stirred her pot around. She looked down into the bottom of the pot, and she said, well, now let me see. Answer me this. What runs without feet? Well, the fool thought. But couldn't tell. And the wise woman said, thou'st not brought me the right thing yet, my lad. I've no brains for thee today. Now be off along thy way. And so the fool walked back down the hill to tell his mother what had happened, but as he approached his house, a neighbor woman came running out of the house to tell the fool that his mother was dying. And the fool rushed inside, and there indeed was his mother lying on her deathbed, and she looked up at her son, and she smiled, and she said, I'm awful glad that thou hast got thy Pottle O Brains, my lad, for I can't look after thee any longer. And then she died. Well, the fool sat down next to his mother's bed. The more he thought about what had just happened, the badder he felt. He thought about how his mother had nursed him when he was a baby, and how she had cooked all of his meals, and how she had mended all of his clothes, and how she had borne with all of his foolishness, and the poor fool just burst into tears. Oh, mother, mother, you should have gone and died and left me all alone. I'm so sad I want to die too, 'cause I like thee better than everything. And as he said that, he remembered the words of the wise woman, and he shouted out, oh no! I can't cut out my mother's heart! What'll I do? What'll I I do to get my pottle of brains? Now I'm all alone in the world. And he thought, and he cried, and he thought some more, and he cried some more, and he thought some more, and he thought some more. Finally, the fool thought so hard that he put himself to sleep. And by the time he woke up, it was the next morning, and by that time he had thought of a plan. And so the fool went to a neighbor's house, and he borrowed a big flour sack, and he brought the flour sack home with him. And once he got there, the fool bundled his dead mother into the flour sack. He flung it over his shoulder, and he carried it back up the hill to the wise woman's house. And when he arrived there, he knocked on the door, he let himself in, and he said, "Good morning, missus. I reckon I brought you the right thing this time." And he dropped the sack down kerflop right in the middle of the floor, and he said, "It's my dead mother, and I liked her even better than my pig." Well, the wise woman was sitting by the fire. She looked doubtfully at the bundle over on the floor. She stirred her pot around. She looked down into the bottom of the pot, and she said, "Well, now let me see. Answer me this. What's yellow and shining, but it isn't gold?" Well, the fool thought, but he couldn't tell. And the wise woman shouted out, "Thou'st not brought me the right thing yet, my lad. I've no brains for thee today. I see that thou art a bigger fool than I thought. Now be off along thy way." And she pushed him to the door, she pushed him out the door, she slammed the door behind him, and the fool shouted out, "See there!" And he cried all the way back down the hill and all the way home. And once he got there, he sat down on the edge of the road and he cried some more. "Oh, woe is me! I've lost the only two things I cared for. And what'll I do now to get my pottle of brains? Now I'm all alone in the world." And he moaned, and he howled, and he cried, and the tears ran down into his mouth. Well, just about at that time, there came walking down the road a neighbor girl, a girl who lived not far away, and this girl was crying too. But this girl was not crying because her mother had died. Oh, no. This girl's mother was very much alive. And as a matter of fact, this girl's mother had just finished giving her daughter a terrible beating. And the girl's sisters all laughed at her. And her father, well, her father was a drunken sot. He always made her sleep out in the chicken coop along with the chickens. So her only dress was torn and dirty again. And she was feeling just as sad as a girl could feel when she looked up, and there she saw the fool. And the fool was crying much louder than she was, for you see, she'd been quietly sobbing into her handkerchief, something like this. Whereas the fool, on the other hand, was fairly wailing, more like this. And when the girl saw how silly the fool looked, she realized that she must look silly too. And so she dried her eyes and she walked up to the fool and she said, "What's the matter with thee, fool?" And the fool said, "Oh, I killed my pig, and I've lost my mother, and I'm no but a fool myself." "That's bad," said the girl. "And haven't thee anyone to look after thee?" "No, and I cannot buy my pottle of brains, 'cause there's nothing I like best left." "What are you talking about?" said the girl, and she sat down next to the fool, and he told her all about the wise woman and his mother and the riddles and his pig, and that he was all alone in the world. And the girl looked at the poor fool with no one to look after him, and She looked past the fool at his nice, neat little house with the barn, with the cow and the chickens, and she remembered again about how horrid her life was at home, and she also remembered that one of her sisters had once told her that a fool could be a good man for a clever girl to marry, and she made up her mind right then and there, and she said, well, I wouldn't mind looking after thee myself. The fool stopped his crying. He looked at the girl. He said, could thee do it? Oh, aye, said the girl. Folks say as fools make good husbands, and I reckon I'll have thee if thou art willing. Well, now, as foolish as the fool was, he was not as foolish as he might have been. He went on to ask, can thou cook? Oh, aye, said the girl. And scrub? Yes, I keep a clean house, said the girl. And mend my clothes? Yes, I can sew too, said the girl. Well then, I reckon that thou wilt do as well as anybody, but, what'll I do about the wise woman? Well, let's just wait a bit on that, said the girl. Something may turn up, but if nothing does, it'll not matter if thou art a fool, so long as thou hast me to look after thee. And so they went to the town and they got married, and as the weeks went by, they were very happy together. It turned out that the girl was a wonderful cook, and she made sure that her new husband always had plenty of his favorite foods to eat, and she mended all of his clothes, and she made him some new ones, and she made curtains for the windows, and she very patiently taught the fool how to tell the differences between the vegetables and the weeds, and how to milk the cow, and how to mend the fences, and well, the poor fool was happier than he had ever before been at any time during his entire miserable life. And his wife was even happier, for taking care of the garden and the animals, and the fool gave her a sense of feeling useful and needed and important that she'd never had before. And of course, it didn't bother her a bit that she no longer had to suffer the beatings and abuse that her parents had so generously heaped upon her. She felt safe in knowing that so long as she had her big, strong, ever-loving fool, that there was no one on the face of God's good earth who could ever hurt her again. But one night the two of them were lying together in bed, and the fool turned to his wife and he said, Cupcake, I think I like you better than everything. Well, that's nice to hear, said his wife. But I see that there's something else going on in thy feeble little brain. Now you tell me, what is it? Well, I think that I have to cut out thy heart and take it to the wise woman to get my pottle of brains. This caused the fool's wife a bit disquiet, and she said, well, I'm glad that thou hast told me about thy great foolish plan before having gone and done anything else about it. I really don't think that's going to be necessary now. You didn't cut out your mother's heart, did ya? No. But maybe if I had, I'd have got my pottle of brains. Well, maybe you would have, and maybe you wouldn't have. But before you go cutting out me heart, why don't you just take me heart and all back to the wise woman's house, and maybe I'll be able to help you with your riddles. Oh, no. Methinks they be much too hard for women folk. Well, let's see. What was the first one? Oh. What runs without feet? Why, it's water, said his wife. The fool was flabbergasted. He said, methinks that might be right. Oh, but the other one was even harder. What's yellow and shining, but it isn't gold? Well, now, do you think that might be the sun? Asked his wife. trying not to let on how obvious the answer really was. And the fool said, "Methinks that might be right too. Let's go to the wise woman's house in the morning." And so the next morning they got up early, and after they'd milked the cow and after they'd put away the breakfast dishes, they walked together back up the hill to the wise woman's house. And when they arrived there they found her sitting outside the front door as if she were waiting for someone to arrive. And the fool said, "Good morning, missus. I reckon I brought you the right thing this time, surely. It's my wife, and I like her better than my dead pig and my dead mother put together." Well, the wise woman looked the fool's wife over from head to toe and from toe to head, and then she said, "Well, then let me see. Answer me this. Why is a bull in a pottery shop like a house on fire?" Well, the fool thought, and just as he was beginning to think that he couldn't tell, his wife stood up on her tiptoes and she whispered in his ear, saying, "It's because the sooner you put it out, the better off you'll be." And the fool said, "Mappin', it's because the sooner you put it out, the better off you'll be?" And the wise woman nodded her head and she said, "That's right. And now thou hast thy Pottle O Brains." But the fool was bewildered. He was befuddled. He looked in his pockets. He looked under his hat. He looked down the front of his shirt, but he couldn't find a thing. And he said, "Well, where is it?" "It's in thy wife's head. The only cure for a fool is a good wife to look after him, and that thou's got. So get out of here and go home." And so the fool and his wife walked back down the hill together, hand in hand, and the fool never wanted to buy a Pottle O Brains again, for his new wife had more than enough for both of them, and together they both lived happily ever after. Ladies and gentlemen of Pottle O Brains, did any of you like that story? Some of you did. Thank you all so very much for coming to Story Time. Stories are free for all who care to listen, or as many as you care to listen to. However, donations are always gratefully accepted. Now, if you'd like to hear more stories, I'd advise you to stay around for the next one. We're coming up on the longest story of the day. And after that, all that's left is the shortest story of the day. Thank you, milady. Or if you like, you could take stories home with you and listen to anyone you like on your way home. Thank you, milady. Thank you, milady. Thank you, my lord. Thank you, my lord. Thank you, my lord. Thank you, milady. Thank you all for stopping by. Thank you even more for giving me all of your money. Thank you, my lord. All right.